Parents cut me off at 18 saying I'd fail. Now at 25, I own their apartment complex. It's not the kind of thing you put on a holiday card, but it's a truth that feels warmer than any fireplace. The story doesn't start with the signing of the deed or the clinking of champagne glasses. It starts 7 years ago, in a living room so white and sterile it felt like an art gallery where you weren't allowed to breathe too loudly. My father, Richard, sat in his leather armchair, the one that cost more than a used car, and stared at me as if I were a bad investment. My mother, Cynthia, stood by the marble fireplace, twisting her diamond ring, her face a mask of practiced disappointment. My parents cut me off at 18 saying I'd fail. Now, at 25, I own their apartment complex. They underestimated my custom phone case business. Subscribe and like to see how their rejection fueled my empire. I had just told them I wasn't going to Yale to study corporate law. Instead, I wanted to take the small savings I had and start an online business creating custom, sustainable phone cases. The silence that followed was heavy enough to suffocate. My father was the first to speak, his voice calm and sharp, like a surgeon's scalpel. Chloe, we are not financing a child's hobby. We are investing in a future. Your future. A future that involves a respectable degree from a respectable institution. He used words like financing and investing for everything, including his own daughter. It's not a hobby, Dad, I said, my voice shaking a little. It's a real business plan. I've done the research. There's a market. He held up a hand, silencing me. The market is for adults, for people who understand how the world works. He leaned forward, his eyes cold. Let me be clear. You either enroll at Yale by the end of the month, or you are on your own. We will not support this fantasy. My mother finally chimed in, her voice a high-pitched whisper of anxiety. What will we tell the neighbors, Richard? Everyone at the club knows she was accepted. Her concern wasn't for me, but for the family's image, a brand she carefully curated. I looked between them, the two people who were supposed to love me unconditionally, and I saw only brand managers. My life was a product they were trying to launch, and I was refusing to follow their marketing plan. A strange calm washed over me. I'm not going, I said, my voice firm for the first time. I'm going to do this myself. My father let out a short, bitter laugh. He stood up and walked to his desk, pulling out his checkbook. He scribbled something down and tore it out with a flourish. He didn't hand it to me. He placed it on the glass coffee table between us. $500, he announced. Severance pay, for your 17 years of compliance. He then looked at me, a cruel smirk on his face, and delivered the line that would become the fuel for my every waking moment for the next 7 years. Money is a language, Chloe, and you're illiterate. Go see how long you last when you can't speak it. I took the check, my hands trembling with a mixture of rage and terror. I didn't say goodbye. I just walked out of that pristine White House, the heavy oak door clicking shut behind me, severing my past from my future. The first 2 years were brutal. I moved into a tiny studio apartment in the worst part of town. The ceiling had a permanent water stain that looked like a sad map of a country I never wanted to visit. I worked 2 jobs, waitressing during the day and doing mind-numbing data entry at night. Every spare dollar, every spare minute went into my business. I built my website from scratch, taught myself photography to showcase my products, and spent hours on social media trying to build a following. There were nights I lived on instant noodles and cried myself to sleep, my father's words echoing in my head. You're illiterate. But every time I thought about quitting, I pictured his smug face and the anger would turn into resolve. My little business, Evercase, started to grow. Slowly at first, then all at once. A tech blogger featured one of my designs and the orders flooded in. I quit my waitressing job, then the data entry one. I hired my first employee, then my 10th. By the time I was 24, Evercase was a multi-million-dollar company, known for its quality and eco-friendly practices. I never reached out to my parents, and they never reached out to me. I saw them sometimes in magazines, attending some charity gala, looking perfect and polished. They never knew their illiterate daughter was building an empire from a rundown studio apartment. About a month ago, my lawyer, a sharp man named Frank, mentioned that a high-end residential building was up for a private sale. It's called the Sterling Towers, he said, looking over his papers. A solid investment. The current owners are retiring. The name hit me like a physical blow. The Sterling Towers. The prestigious, ridiculously expensive building my parents had moved into a few years ago. The one my mother bragged about in a society column I'd stumbled upon online. I felt a slow smile spread across my face. It was the kind of opportunity that poets would write about. A perfect circle closing. My father taught me that money was a language. Over the last 7 years, I hadn't just learned to speak it. I had become fluent. I was about to write a sentence he would be forced to read for the rest of his life. "Buy it," I said, my voice so quiet it barely disturbed the air in Frank's mahogany-paneled office. Frank paused, his pen hovering over a legal pad. He looked up at me over the top of his half-moon glasses. "Buy the Sterling Towers? Chloe, this is a 9-figure acquisition. It's not a pair of shoes." I gave him a small, tight smile. "I'm aware of the price, Frank. I want it." He leaned back, studying my face, trying to read the strategy behind the move. Frank was a brilliant lawyer, but he was a man of logic and contracts. He saw assets and liabilities. He didn't see the ghost of an 18-year-old girl standing behind me, clutching a $500 check like a life raft. "All right," he said slowly, his professional demeanor clicking back into place. "The sellers are a family trust. They want a quiet, all-cash deal to avoid market speculation. Your liquidity gives us an advantage." He started scribbling notes. "We'll need to set up a holding corporation to make the purchase. It provides a layer of anonymity." "Perfect," I said. "I don't want my name anywhere near the initial paperwork. Let's call the corporation Severance Properties, LLC. A flicker of understanding crossed Frank's face. He knew my story, at least the broad strokes of it. He knew I'd built my company from nothing. He nodded, a newfound respect in his eyes. "Severance Properties, LLC, I like it. It has a certain finality to it." The next few weeks were a blur of wire transfers, legal documents, and due diligence reports that were thicker than phone books. I authorized the transfer of $125 million from my business accounts to an escrow account. Seeing that number, with all its commas and zeros, didn't feel real. It was abstract, like a score in a video game. What felt real was the memory of counting out loose change to buy a loaf of bread, praying the cashier wouldn't notice my trembling hands. One night, unable to sleep, I found myself scrolling through old photos on my laptop. I stopped at one from 5 years ago. It was a selfie I'd taken in my first studio apartment. I was sitting on the floor, a bowl of instant noodles in my lap, with my laptop balanced on a cardboard box. In the background, you could see the water stain on the ceiling, the one that looked like a map of despair. I had been working on the Evercase website, and I remembered that exact moment. I had just paid my rent and had exactly $17 left to my name for the rest of the month. I had felt so utterly alone, so convinced my father was right. I closed the laptop. The woman in that photo wouldn't believe where I was now. Sitting in a penthouse apartment overlooking the city, about to become the owner of the very symbol of the world that had rejected her. My father had said money was a language. For years, I had been a desperate immigrant in a foreign land, learning a new tongue through sheer survival. Now, I was about to deliver a speech. A week later, Frank called me. "The sellers have accepted our offer," he said, his voice crisp. "No counters." They were impressed with the clean, all-cash proposal. Severance Properties is officially the new owner of the Sterling Towers, pending final signatures. My heart didn't race. My hands didn't shake. I just felt a profound, chilling calm. It was the feeling of a chess piece clicking into its final checkmate position. "When do we sign?" I asked. "Tomorrow morning, 10 a.m., my office. The documents are ready." That night, I drove to the Sterling Towers. I didn't go in. I just parked my car across the street and looked up at the gleaming facade. It was a monument to wealth and exclusivity, its windows glowing like golden eyes in the night sky. On the 23rd floor, a light was on in the corner penthouse. My parents' penthouse. I imagined them inside, my mother Cynthia arranging flowers, my father Richard reading the Wall Street Journal, both of them secure in their perfect, curated world. They were completely oblivious. They had no idea their universe had just tilted on its axis, and that their illiterate daughter was now the one holding the globe. I wondered what my father would say if he knew. He had taught me that money was a language, but he never considered that one day I would use it to buy his silence. The first rent check would be due in 2 weeks. I couldn't wait to see who signed it. The next morning, I walked into Frank's office feeling strangely detached. The air smelled of old leather and expensive coffee. I was wearing a simple black dress, nothing that would suggest I was about to finalize a $125 million deal. I felt like an actress about to go on stage for a role she had rehearsed for 7 years. Frank was already there, a mountain of paperwork neatly stacked on his large mahogany desk. He greeted me with a professional nod. "Chloe, everything is in order." He gestured to a chair opposite him. Sitting down, I stared at the stack of documents. Each page represented more money than I could have dreamed of just a few years ago. It was a fortress of legal jargon and financial figures, and I was about to become its queen. The actual signing was anticlimactic. There were no flashing lights, no dramatic music. It was just me, Frank, and the quiet scratch of a pen on thick, creamy paper. I signed my name, Chloe, over and over again on signature lines next to the typed name of Severance Properties, LLC. With each stroke of the pen, I felt a small, cold piece of my past being chipped away and replaced with something harder, something more permanent. When the last document was signed, Frank slid the pile away and leaned back in his chair. "Congratulations," he said, his tone measured. "You are now the owner of one of the most prestigious residential properties in the city." I didn't feel victorious. I just felt quiet. I looked out the window at the cityscape below. My father always said that wealth has its own grammar, and the first rule is that you never lose. He saw the world as a series of transactions where someone always came out on top. For him, losing was a sign of weakness, of not understanding the language. He had written me off as a lost cause, a grammatical error in his perfect sentence of a life. "What's the first order of business?" I asked, turning back to Frank. "Do we send eviction notices?" Frank raised an eyebrow. "You could. The penthouse your parents occupy is a month-to-month lease, surprisingly. You could have them out in 30 days, but I get the feeling that's too simple for you." He was right. Kicking them out was a full stop. I wanted to write a whole chapter. "It's too loud," I said. "My father taught me that money is a language. Yelling is for people who have nothing interesting to say. I want to have a conversation." A slow smile spread across Frank's face. "I see. So what's our opening line?" "We start with a formal introduction," I explained. "I want a letter sent to every resident of the Sterling Towers. A standard corporate-sounding letter. It will announce the change in ownership to Severance Properties, LLC. It should mention a seamless transition, no changes to existing lease terms for now, and so on. Standard procedure." "And who will be managing the property?" Frank asked. "The current management company is loyal to the old owners. You'll need your own person on the inside." "I was thinking the same thing," I said. "I need someone who understands discretion, someone who reports only to me." Frank nodded, already reaching for his phone. "I have someone in mind. His name is Carter. He's young, sharp, and owes me a significant favor. He's managed several high-end properties and is known for being a ghost. You never see him, but everything runs perfectly." "He sounds perfect," I said. "Set up a meeting for this afternoon." That afternoon, I met Carter. He was in his early 30s, with a calm demeanor and eyes that seemed to notice everything. He wore a perfectly tailored but unremarkable gray suit. He was, as Frank had described, a ghost. I explained the situation to him, leaving out the personal details. I was a private investor who valued anonymity, and he would be my sole representative. "Your first task, Carter," I said, sliding a crisp cream-colored envelope across the table, "is to ensure this letter is delivered to every tenant by tomorrow morning. Hand-delivered to their door. No mailboxes." He picked up the envelope, his expression unreadable. "And what should I tell the tenants if they have questions about Severance Properties?" "You tell them it's a private real estate investment firm," I said. "You give them nothing else. You will be polite, professional, and completely unhelpful, especially to the residents of the penthouse on the 23rd floor. Be prepared. They will likely try to intimidate you or bribe you for information. Your job is to be a polite, impenetrable wall." Carter gave a slight nod. "I understand completely, miss." He didn't call me by my last name. He didn't need to. In his world, I was just his employer. "Good," I said. You'll send me a daily report. I want to know about maintenance requests, resident complaints, everything, especially from the penthouse. After he left, I stood by the window of my own apartment, looking out at the city. The Sterling Towers was a distant, glittering spike in the skyline. Inside that building, my parents were probably having dinner, discussing their stocks or their next vacation, completely unaware that the foundation of their world had just been bought out from under them. The letter was on its way. A simple piece of paper that would land on their doorstep like a single, ominous raindrop before a storm. I wasn't just speaking the language of money anymore. I was about to become the editor of their entire reality, and the first correction was already in press. The next morning felt like the calm before an earthquake. I made coffee, went through my Evercase emails, and tried to pretend it was just another Tuesday. But my phone sat on the kitchen counter like a dormant volcano, and I couldn't take my eyes off it. Every notification made my heart jump. I was waiting for a report from my ghost, Carter. At exactly 10:15 a.m., an email arrived. The subject line was simply, Daily Report, the Sterling Towers. There was no greeting. It was a bullet-pointed list of mundane building events, a leaky faucet in 7B, a request for a new key fob from 12C, and then, the final section, penthouse interaction. I took a deep breath and read. Carter's prose was as gray and functional as his suit. 0905, letter delivered to penthouse unit, door answered by female resident Cynthia. 0906, resident questioned the name Severance Properties LLC, described it as unsettling, inquired about the identity of the new owners. 0907, per instruction, provided standard response regarding a private investment firm. Resident expressed concern over potential changes to building aesthetic. 0910, male resident Richard came to the door. He did not take the letter. He looked past me down the hall as if expecting someone else. He asked, Is that all? 0911, I confirmed it was. Richard took the letter from Cynthia, glanced at it, and scoffed. His exact words were, Another shell corporation from Delaware, probably. They buy up these buildings and flip them. It's just business. 0912. Richard attempted to extract information, asked for a name on the board of directors, offered to make a call to smooth the transition with the Residents Association, of which he is the chairman. SARO 913. Per instruction, I politely declined to provide further details, citing client confidentiality. ARO 914. Richard's demeanor shifted. He said, Son, let me give you some advice. In this building, knowing the right people is currency. You'd be wise to learn who they are. He then closed the door. I read the email 3 times. It was perfect. My mother worried about the flower arrangements in the lobby. My father immediately seeing it as a transaction, a game of influence he was certain he could win. He called Carter son. The casual, condescending power play was so familiar it made my teeth ache. He thought this was business as usual. He had no idea the business was him. The name Severance Properties had flown right over his head, dismissed as meaningless corporate jargon. He was so used to speaking the language of money that he didn't recognize it when it was used as a weapon against him. An old mentor of mine, a quiet man named Albert who ran the print shop where I got my first business cards made, once told me something while watching his ancient printing press work. True power isn't loud, Chloe, he'd said over the rhythmic clanking of the machine. It's the quiet, steady pressure that shapes everything. My father was loud. He was all about expensive suits, firm handshakes, and dropping names. My power would be quiet. It would be memos, policy changes, and the slow, inexorable tightening of rules. My phone rang. It was Frank. Did you get the report from Carter? He asked, a hint of amusement in his voice. I did, I said, looking out my window. My father is trying to network with his new landlord. Frank chuckled. He doesn't know it yet, but he's essentially trying to bribe his own daughter for information about herself. The irony is thick enough to bottle. He paused. So, what's your next move, boss? I smiled at the title. My father thinks this is a simple acquisition by some faceless fund. He thinks he can control the narrative because he's the chairman of the Residents Association. It's time to remind him who actually owns the building. An eviction notice? Frank suggested. No, not yet, I said. That's a declaration of war. I'm still in the psychological operations phase. I thought for a moment. What's the most sacred thing to people like my parents? Their convenience, their seamless, frictionless existence. I remembered the endless dinner parties, where my father would boast about the Sterling's amenities. The private wine cellar in the basement was his favorite. Each resident of the upper floors had a temperature-controlled locker. My father's was filled with ridiculously expensive French wines he served to impress his business partners. Carter's next task is to send out a building-wide memo, I instructed. Effective in 48 hours, the wine cellar will be closed for a full inventory and security system upgrade. Access will be suspended for an indefinite period. Frank was silent for a beat, then let out a low whistle. Oh, that's nasty. Richard has that big charity gala coming up next week. He always hosts a pre-gala reception in his penthouse. I know, I said calmly. He'll need his best bottles to show off. It will be a minor inconvenience, of course, but it's an inconvenience he can't solve by making a call or knowing the right people. It's a problem he can't buy his way out of. You're not just buying the building, are you? Frank said, his voice now serious. You're rewriting the rules of their world. My father wrote me out of his world with a $500 check, I replied, my voice cold. I'm just returning the favor, one memo at a time. I hung up and forwarded the instructions to Carter. The response came back in less than a minute. Understood. Memo will be drafted and distributed by end of day. I leaned back in my chair, a feeling of cold, precise power settling over me. My father had told me I was illiterate in the language of money. He was about to discover I had not only learned the language, but I had also mastered its most subtle and cutting dialect, the fine print. And I was about to make him read every single word. The memo went out at 4 p.m. on a Tuesday. I spent the rest of the evening in a state of strange, suspended calm, like the air before a thunderstorm. I didn't check my phone. I didn't refresh my email. I made myself a simple dinner, watched a documentary about deep-sea life, and went to bed at 10. My father operated on a predictable schedule of outrage. He would see the notice, simmer overnight while trying to pull strings, and then unleash his fury the following morning when his calls weren't immediately returned. My phone rang at precisely 9:15 a.m. the next day. It was Frank. "Good morning, sunshine," he said, his voice laced with amusement. "I trust you slept well." "Like a baby," I replied, taking a sip of my coffee. "I take it the first tremor has been felt." "Tremor is an understatement," Frank said. "Carter just forwarded me the voicemail your father left on the building management's emergency line at 7:03 a.m. It's a masterpiece of entitled fury. I've saved it for you. Are you sitting down?" I settled into my office chair. "Play it." A click, and then my father's voice filled the speaker, tight with a rage he was trying to contain within a corporate, commanding tone. "This is Richard Sterling from the penthouse. I am calling to report a complete and utter failure of service. I received a memo yesterday regarding the indefinite closure of the wine cellar. Let me be unequivocally clear. This is not acceptable. This is a breach of my residency agreement and a violation of the amenities promised. I am the chairman of the Residents Association, and I was not consulted. I host an important gala reception in less than a week. This is not a request. It is a directive. You will reopen that cellar by noon today. I don't care about your inventory or your phantom security upgrades. Get it done. I expect a call back from your superior within the hour to confirm this has been handled. This is a serious operational deficiency, and I will be escalating it." The recording ended. There was a moment of silence. "Operational deficiency," I repeated softly, a smile touching my lips. "He talks about his wine like it's a server farm that went down." Frank chuckled on the other end. "The man is a walking textbook of corporate jargon. Carter, of course, followed your instructions and responded with a polite, generic email stating that the upgrade is proceeding as scheduled for the safety and security of all residents' assets, and that they cannot provide a specific timeline for completion." "Perfect," I said. "The vaguer, the better. The lack of a concrete person to yell at will drive him insane. He's used to a world where every problem has a name and a price." "So he's stewing," Frank said, "and his precious wine is locked away. What's the next phase of Operation Parental Annoyance?" I looked out my window at the city skyline. My father's building, the Sterling, was visible from here, a gleaming monument to old money and insulated privilege. The wine cellar was a strategic strike against a specific event. It's a temporary, albeit sharp, pain. The next move needs to be more fundamental. It needs to be a daily friction, a constant reminder that the world he paid so much to control is no longer his. I'm listening, Frank said. The elevators, I said. The penthouse suites have a private elevator that goes directly from the lobby to their floor. No stops. It requires a special key fob. It's their symbol of being above everyone else, literally. They don't have to share air with the residents from the lower floors. I could almost hear Frank nodding. A classic status symbol. Effective tomorrow morning, I continued, my plan already fully formed. That private elevator is going out of service for an essential modernization of the fob security system. Another memo from Carter. It will be down for maintenance for, let's say, 2 weeks. 2 weeks? Frank whistled. That's brutal. Where will they go? They will be redirected to use the service elevator at the rear of the building, I said, the words tasting like victory. The same one the maintenance staff, the delivery guys, and the cleaning crews use, the one they use to take out the trash. There was a long pause. Chloe, Frank finally said, his voice a mix of awe and horror. That's not just an inconvenience. That's a public shaming. My mother, Cynthia, once refused to get into a taxi because she didn't like the brand of air freshener hanging from the mirror, I recalled. She made the driver wait while she called another one. Can you imagine her? In her Chanel suit, standing next to a rolling bin of garbage bags, smelling of industrial disinfectant, on her way to a luncheon? The image was so vivid, so perfect. It wasn't about destroying them financially. Not yet. It was about dismantling the invisible walls they had built around themselves, the ones that separated them from the reality of the world. They had thrown me out into that world with nothing, expecting me to fail. I was simply going to invite them to visit, one service elevator ride at a time. My father wrote me off because I chose to build something with my own hands instead of inheriting a title, I said, my voice steady and cold. He thinks hard work is for other people. It's time he learned what it feels like to walk through the back door. I could hear Frank typing. Instructions for Carter? Draft the memo, I said. Make it sound as technical and unavoidable as possible. Cabling diagnostics, controller software patches, compliance with new city safety regulations. He can't argue with regulations. Posted in the lobby tonight after 10 p.m. I want them to wake up to it. Consider it done, Frank said. You know, for someone who makes eco-friendly phone cases, you have a truly ruthless streak. They taught me that the most important asset is leverage, I replied. They just never thought I'd be the one to use it against them. The next morning, I woke up at 6 a.m. to the familiar sounds of the city, not to the deafening silence of a penthouse. My apartment was small, a one-bedroom with a view of a brick wall and a fire escape, but every inch of it was mine. I made coffee in a simple drip machine, the kind my mother, Cynthia, would probably use to water her orchids, and sat by my window. I didn't need a memo from Carter to know the plan was in motion. I could feel it. A subtle shift in the city's power dynamic that only I was aware of. My phone buzzed at precisely 9:15 a.m. It was Frank. I answered on the first ring. Report, I said, trying to keep my voice even. The memo is a work of art, Frank began, and I could hear the smile in his voice. Posted on a tasteful laminated sign right next to the elevator call button. Gold lettering on a black background. Very official. Carter even added a city ordinance number he completely made up for authenticity. And the reaction? I asked, my heart starting to beat a little faster. Chaos, he said with satisfaction. Pure, unadulterated, first-world chaos. I had one of my contacts on the cleaning staff send me updates. Your father, Richard, apparently saw the sign and demanded to speak with Carter immediately. Carter, following your instructions, was conveniently off-site at a mandatory municipal safety seminar and unreachable. I pictured my father, his face turning a dangerous shade of purple, his jaw tight. He hated being told no more than anything. He tried to use his fob on the private elevator anyway, Frank continued. It didn't work, of course. The light just blinked red. He then had a 10-minute argument with the concierge, a young man named Paul, who nearly burst into tears. Finally, he was directed to the service entrance. And my mother? Oh, this is the best part, Frank chuckled. Cynthia came down around 10, dressed for her weekly brunch at the Starlight Club. A cream-colored Chanel suit, pearls, the whole 9 yards. When she was told about the elevator, she just stood there, speechless, for a full minute. The cleaning crew was taking out the recycling at the time. Big, blue, overflowing bins. She had to step around a pile of discarded cardboard boxes to get to the service elevator. Her heel caught on a piece of plastic wrap. I closed my eyes, savoring the image. It was better than I had imagined. My mother, a woman who considered a slightly wilted flower in a vase a personal affront, navigating a back alley service corridor. She looked, Frank paused, searching for the right word, soiled, not her suit, but her aura, like a queen forced to walk through a stable. She didn't say a word, just got in the elevator with the concierge and a delivery guy holding a stack of pizzas. I let out a breath I didn't realize I was holding. Good. That's a good start. A start? Frank sounded surprised. Chloe, this is a masterpiece of psychological warfare. What's next? I took a sip of my coffee. It was bitter and strong, the opposite of the smooth, expensive blends my parents drank. The Starlight Club, I said. That's next. They've been members for 30 years. My father practically runs the finance committee. It's the center of their social universe. I remembered my father's words from years ago, lecturing me over a dinner of sea bass and asparagus. Prestige is the only currency that matters, Chloe, he had said, swirling his wine. Everything else is just paper. He believed it. Their entire identity was built on a foundation of exclusivity and perceived importance. I was about to test how strong that foundation really was. What about it? Frank asked. I had you look into their membership files a few months back. You found anything interesting? Just the usual, he replied. Their dues are always paid on time from a dedicated account. They have a permanent dinner reservation every Friday night. Richard hosts a poker game there once a month. Nothing out of the ordinary. What about the club's management? I pressed. Who's in charge? The general manager is a man named Albert, Frank said. Been there for about 5 years. Seems like a straight arrow. Ex-hotel manager from a big chain. Albert, I repeated the name. I knew him. Not well, but I knew him. A few years ago, when I was just starting my business, I was designing custom phone cases for corporate events. Albert had just started at the Starlight and hired me to create cases for their annual charity gala. He was professional, but I remembered he'd been treated poorly by some of the board members, my father included. They saw him as staff, someone to be ordered around. He had a daughter who was my age, trying to start her own graphic design business. We had bonded over that. Get me a meeting with Albert, I said. Tell him Chloe from Eco Case Designs wants to discuss a new corporate partnership. A partnership? Yes, I said, a new plan crystallizing in my mind. The club is always looking for green initiatives to put in their newsletters. It makes the members feel philanthropic without actually having to do anything. We're going to propose a club-wide recycling program for old electronics, sponsored by my company, of course. That's your way in, Frank realized. But what's the play? The club has a notoriously bad Wi-Fi signal in the main dining room. It's an old building, thick walls. The members complain about it constantly, I explained. As part of my eco initiative, I'm going to offer to install a state-of-the-art signal boosting system, free of charge. A gift to the club. A Trojan horse, Frank whispered, catching on. Exactly. A Trojan horse that gives my technician access to their entire network infrastructure. And once we're in... My phone beeped. It was another call coming in. The caller ID made my blood run cold for a second. It was my mother. Frank, I have to go. My mother is calling me. What? Why? To complain, I assume, I said, a slow, cold smile spreading across my face. She has no idea who is on the other end of the line. She just needs someone to vent to about her horrible, horrible day. I switched over to her call. Hello? I said, my voice dripping with false sweetness. Chloe, darling. Cynthia's voice was frayed, stretched thin like old elastic. You will not believe the day I am having. The management in this building has completely lost its mind. I listened, holding the phone a few inches from my ear as my mother's voice, sharp and tinny, filled my small office. They changed the valet service, Chloe. The new boys don't know my car. I had to wait a full 3 minutes. 3. And the flowers in the lobby? They're carnations. Tacky, cheap carnations. It's like the new management is actively trying to make the place look like a budget motel. My father called my dream a fantasy and threatened to cut me off. What would you have done in my place? Comment what you think and share if you've ever defied expectations. I made a soft, sympathetic sound. That sounds incredibly frustrating, Mother. Inside, I was smiling. I had personally approved the floral budget cut. The carnations were a specific touch. My father always said carnations were for funerals and apologies, and I felt this was a bit of both. Frustrating doesn't even begin to cover it, she went on, her voice rising. Richard is beside himself. He says the new policies are detrimental to the building's asset value. He's drafting a letter, a strongly worded letter. I could picture it perfectly. My father, Richard, in his expensive study, composing a legalistic takedown of a policy about guest parking permits that I had written on my lunch break 3 weeks ago. The image was so satisfying it felt like a warm meal. Well, I'm sure they'll listen to Dad, I said, my voice smooth as silk. He's always so persuasive. One would hope, Cynthia sighed dramatically. It's all just so much stress. I was telling everyone at the club today during lunch, and they were all horrified. And of course, the Wi-Fi there is so dreadful, I couldn't even send a picture of the dreadful carnations to your aunt. Bingo. My opening. Oh, that's a shame, I said. You know, it's funny you mention that. I was just reading about a new tech initiative. Companies are offering free system upgrades to places like clubs for promotional purposes. It's a tax write-off for them and good publicity. There was a pause on her end. I could hear the gears turning in her mind, the calculation of getting something for free. Really? Free? Completely free, I confirmed. It's for their portfolio. They install everything, and the club gets to boast about its new state-of-the-art amenities. Everyone wins. Well, she said, her tone shifting from complaining to scheming. I am on the membership committee. Perhaps I should mention this. What's the company called? I gave her the name of a shell corporation I'd set up last month, one with a slick website and glowing fake testimonials. Ecotech Solutions, I said. They specialize in sustainable tech. After a few more minutes of her complaints, which I dutifully absorbed like a sponge, we hung up. I immediately called Frank back. She took the bait, I said, unable to keep the triumph out of my voice. She's going to propose it to the club's committee herself. She'll think it was her brilliant idea. Frank let out a low whistle. That's cold, Chloe. Using your own mother as the delivery system for the Trojan horse. She's the perfect delivery system, I corrected. No one would ever suspect her of being part of a plan. She's too self-absorbed. 2 days later, I got an email. It was from the club manager, a man named Albert. My mother had apparently been very persuasive. He was formally inviting Ecotech Solutions to present a proposal for a complimentary network overhaul. The meeting was set for the following week. Frank and I spent days preparing. We created a flawless presentation, complete with charts showing signal strength and data flow, all designed to look impressive and be utterly boring. The real work was in the technical schematics for the installation, where the access point for our breach was hidden in plain sight, disguised as a routine signal relay. I walked into the club's boardroom wearing a simple but expensive-looking gray dress, my hair pulled back professionally. I was no longer the rebellious teenager they remembered. I was a polished executive. Albert, the manager, was a man in his late 50s with a tired face and a suit that was a little too tight. He introduced me to the 2 other committee members present. One was a quiet man who barely looked up from his phone. The other was Carter. My blood ran cold for a second, but I kept my expression neutral. Carter was my father's right-hand man, the one who handled his dirtiest business dealings. He was on the board of every company my father controlled, and apparently, on the committee of his precious club. He looked at me with a flicker of recognition, but no warmth. Chloe, he said, his voice flat. What a surprise. Last I heard you were selling trinkets online. Hello, Carter, I said, my smile not reaching my eyes. The trinket business has been very good to me. We've expanded into corporate tech solutions. I gave the presentation. I used all the right words: synergy, optimization, seamless integration. I watched their eyes glaze over at the appropriate moments. Albert was sold. The other man didn't care. Only Carter watched me, his gaze sharp and analytical. When I finished, Albert was beaming. "This is a most generous offer, Miss, Chloe. We'd be fools to refuse." "I agree," Carter said slowly, his eyes still locked on me. "It is generous, almost too generous." He leaned forward, placing his hands on the polished mahogany table. "Our club values security and privacy above all. I would need to personally oversee the installation, and my security team would need to vet your technician." It was a challenge, a direct one. He was suspicious. He didn't know what he was looking for, but his instincts told him something was off. This was the complication Frank and I had worried about. I held his gaze. Backing down would be an admission of guilt. "Of course," I said, my voice perfectly calm. "We welcome the oversight. Transparency is a cornerstone of our business model. Our best technician, Paul, is available to start next week. I'll send his file over for your review this afternoon." I knew Paul could handle it. He was the best hacker I knew, and he looked more like a harmless college kid than a digital phantom. But with Carter watching his every move, the entire plan just got 10 times more dangerous. The Trojan horse was at the gates, but now the gatekeeper would be watching it with a magnifying glass. I walked out of that boardroom with my head held high, but I could feel Carter's gaze on my back like a physical weight. It was the same look my father used to give me, a look that assessed, calculated, and dismissed all at once. I didn't let my smile falter until the heavy oak doors closed behind me, the sound echoing in the silent carpeted hallway. Only then did I let out a breath I didn't realize I'd been holding. The air in the club was stale, thick with the scent of old money and entitlement. I couldn't wait to burn it all down. As soon as I got to my car, a sleek but understated black sedan, I pulled out my phone. My hands were trembling slightly, a traitorous reaction that infuriated me. I gripped the steering wheel until my knuckles turned white, forcing the tremor to stop before dialing Frank. He picked up on the first ring. "How did it go?" His voice was tense. "It went well," I said, keeping my tone even. "Too well. Albert is ready to sign the contract tomorrow. There's a problem, though. Carter." I heard Frank sigh on the other end of the line. It was a weary sound. "Of course. Richard would have his dog guarding the door." "What did he do?" "He's suspicious," I explained, watching a group of men in golf attire laugh as they walked past my car. "He didn't say why, but he felt it. He's insisting on personally overseeing the installation and vetting our technician. His team will be watching Paul's every move." There was a long pause. "Chloe, this is too risky. With Carter involved, he's not just some club manager. He's Richard's enforcer. He knows how to look for weaknesses because he spends his life creating them for other people. We should pull the plug." "No," I said, my voice firm. "We're not pulling anything. We knew there would be obstacles. This is just the first real one. I'm on my way to meet Paul now. We'll figure it out." "Be careful," Frank said, his voice low. "You're swimming with sharks, Chloe. Don't forget that." I ended the call and drove to a small, independent coffee shop downtown, the kind of place my parents would have called grimy. It was loud, filled with students and freelancers, and the air smelled of roasted coffee beans and burnt sugar. I found Paul tucked away in a corner booth, his laptop covered in stickers for obscure open-source projects. He was typing furiously, a half-empty mug of something that looked more like a dessert than a coffee next to him. He couldn't have been older than 22, with a hoodie pulled over his messy hair and earbuds in. He was the last person anyone would suspect of being able to dismantle a corporate empire from a keyboard. He looked up as I approached and pulled out his earbuds. "So, did they take the bait?" I slid into the booth opposite him. "They did, but Carter is on the committee. He's going to be our shadow." I explained the situation. As I spoke, Paul didn't look worried. He looked intrigued, a small smile playing on his lips. He leaned back, tapping his fingers on the table. "So the watchdog wants to watch? Cute. He thinks he's going to stand over my shoulder and catch me sliding a file named virus.exe onto his server?" He chuckled. "Boomers." His confidence was infectious, but I was still tense. This isn't a joke, Paul. Carter is dangerous. If he finds anything, the whole plan is compromised, and we're exposed. I'm not joking, he said, his expression turning serious. I'm just saying, his method is outdated. He's looking for a break-in, a physical attack. He'll watch the front door while I'm already inside, making coffee in his kitchen. I remembered something my father used to say during his hostile takeovers, a piece of advice he gave with a smug grin. He'd lean back in his expensive chair and say, "Every foundation has cracks. You just have to know where to press." Carter thought he was reinforcing the foundation, but he was just showing us exactly where the cracks were. My father's own paranoia, funneled through his most trusted man, would be his undoing. "What's your plan?" I asked Paul. "We give him what he wants," Paul said, leaning forward. "A show. He wants to vet me? Great. Your friend Frank will create a perfect, sanitized work history for me. He wants to watch me install the hardware? Perfect. I'll install the most beautiful, top-of-the-line security cameras and servers he's ever seen. I'll let his security team check every piece of equipment. They'll find nothing because there's nothing to find." "But the Trojan horse?" I asked, confused. "The hardware is clean," Paul explained, his eyes lighting up. "The Trojan horse won't be in the hardware. It'll be in the software update for the club's existing membership management system. Something completely unrelated. While Carter and his goons are watching me plug in cables in the basement, I'll push a mandatory security patch to their office computers upstairs. It'll look like a routine update from their software provider. He'll be so focused on the shiny new toys, he won't even think to look at the boring old system that runs their billing and membership database. And once that patch is installed, I own them." It was brilliant. A classic misdirection. Carter would be looking for a bomb, so he'd never notice the poison in the water supply. "Can you do that?" I asked. "I can make their system sing opera if you want me to," Paul said with a grin. "The question is, can you keep Carter distracted enough upstairs while I'm doing my thing?" "Leave that to me," I said, a genuine smile finally breaking through my tension. I left the coffee shop feeling a renewed sense of purpose. The risk was higher, but the plan was smarter. That afternoon, I emailed Albert and Carter, confirming our agreement. Attached was the file for their technician review, a perfectly crafted, completely fictional resume for a brilliant young man named Paul. The file was sent. The bait was laid. Now we just had to hope the wolf would be too busy watching the cage to notice the trapdoor beneath his feet. The email from Albert arrived less than 24 hours later. It was brief and cold, exactly as I expected. "Mr. Evans's head of security, Mr. Carter, would like to meet with your technician, Paul. Tomorrow, 10 a.m., our offices." No pleasantries, no questions. It was a summons, not an invitation. I forwarded it to Paul with a single question. "Ready for the lion's den?" His reply came back in minutes. "Born ready. I'll wear a fireproof suit." The next morning, we walked into the lobby of my father's corporate headquarters. It was a cathedral of glass and steel, designed to make people feel small. I hadn't set foot in this building in 7 years, not since I was a teenager bringing my father his forgotten briefcase. The air still smelled the same. Money, ambition, and a faint, antiseptic lemon cleaner. We were escorted to a conference room on the top floor. The view of the city was breathtaking, a panorama of power that my father looked at every single day. Carter was already there, sitting at the head of a long, dark wood table. He didn't stand when we entered. He just watched us, his eyes missing nothing. Albert sat to his right, looking uncomfortable, like a man forced to attend a meeting he knew would be unpleasant. "Chloe," Albert said with a tight nod. "This is Paul." Carter didn't even glance at me. His focus was entirely on Paul. "So you're the genius who's going to fix our security," he said. It wasn't a compliment. It was a challenge. "I'm the technician you're considering hiring," Paul corrected him smoothly, taking a seat across the table. He was calm, his posture relaxed. He looked like he belonged there more than I did. "I've reviewed the preliminary specs you sent over. It's an interesting setup. A little dated, but solid bones." Carter's jaw tightened. "Dated?" "Legacy systems have their charm," Paul said with a shrug. "But technology moves fast. You've got a fortress with a wooden door, strong walls, but the entry point is vulnerable. I'm not here to criticize, I'm here to upgrade you to a steel vault. I watched, holding my breath. Paul was playing a dangerous game, intentionally poking the bear. But it was brilliant. He was appealing directly to Carter's paranoia. He wasn't just offering a service, he was validating Carter's deepest fears. For the next hour, Carter grilled him. He went through Paul's fake resume line by line, asking obscure technical questions about his supposed past projects. Paul answered every question without hesitation. He used acronyms and jargon that flew over my head, and probably Albert's too. But Carter seemed to follow every word, nodding slowly. Paul talked about firewalls and encrypted servers, about biometric scanners and motion sensors so sensitive they could detect a change in air pressure. He was putting on a masterclass performance. He was selling them the most secure, most advanced, most expensive system imaginable. And they were buying it. I saw the shift in Carter's posture. He leaned forward, intrigued. Albert was scribbling notes furiously. This was the misdirection in action. Paul was dangling a shiny, impenetrable fortress in front of them, and they were so mesmerized by its gleaming walls that they weren't thinking about anything else. My father's words echoed in my mind. Every foundation has cracks. You just have to know where to press. Carter believed he was reinforcing the foundation, patching every possible weakness. He had no idea he was the crack. His obsession was our entry point. The installation will be seamless, Paul continued, sketching a diagram on a digital whiteboard. I'll oversee the hardware placement myself. New servers in the basement, new cameras with neural network recognition, new access pads. Your team can watch my every move. I believe in full transparency. Carter stared at the diagram, his eyes tracing the lines of his new imaginary fortress. Full transparency, he repeated, testing the words. I like the sound of that. I felt a surge of hope. It was working. It was actually working. Then Carter looked up from the whiteboard, his gaze sharp as glass. You're right. Full transparency is key. My team will shadow you during the entire hardware installation. They will inspect every piece of equipment before it's even brought into the building. Of course, Paul said easily. I'd expect nothing less. Good, Carter said, a slow, predatory smile spreading across his face. And one more thing. Before any of your proprietary software is installed on our new servers, I want a full source code audit. My own independent team of programmers will review every single line of your code, every driver, every firmware update, every patch. We need to ensure there are no backdoors, no Trojan horses. The air in the room went still. My heart felt like it had dropped into my stomach. A source code audit. He wanted to look inside the engine. Paul's plan relied on a hidden piece of code in a software update. If they reviewed everything, they would find it. Or even if the Trojan horse was separate, this level of scrutiny would make it impossible to deploy it without being detected. I looked at Paul, trying to keep my expression neutral. His face was unreadable. He didn't flinch. He simply met Carter's smug gaze. An audit, Paul said, his voice even. That's a reasonable request for a security-conscious client. He paused, letting the tension hang in the air for a moment. I'll have my legal team draw up the necessary non-disclosure agreements. You'll have the code by the end of the week. Carter leaned back, satisfied. He thought he had won. He thought he had set the ultimate trap, the final test of loyalty and transparency. He had no idea he'd just handed us the keys to his kingdom. But as we stood up to leave, a cold dread washed over me. Paul's confidence was unshakable, but this was a complication we hadn't anticipated. The path to victory had just gotten a lot narrower, and the fall would be much, much farther. The moment the heavy oak door of the conference room clicked shut behind us, I felt like I could finally exhale. But the air I drew in was sharp and cold, filled with the metallic taste of failure. My hands were trembling, so I shoved them into my pockets. We walked down the long, silent corridor, our footsteps echoing on the polished marble. The whole building felt like a mausoleum, a monument to the kind of wealth that crushed people like me. A source code audit, I whispered, my voice barely a crackle. I couldn't look at Paul. I just stared at the ridiculously expensive abstract art on the walls. He wants to see the code. He'll find it, Paul. It's over. Paul didn't say anything. He just kept walking at the same unhurried pace as if we had just discussed the weather. His calmness was starting to feel less like confidence and more like insanity. We reached the elevators, and he pressed the button. The brass doors slid open with a soft chime. Inside, the mirrored walls reflected a distorted version of us. Me, pale and frayed at the edges. Him, composed and unreadable. As the elevator began its smooth descent from the 40th floor, I couldn't take the silence anymore. Did you hear me? They're going to read every line. Our Trojan horse, the back door, whatever you built. They'll have a team of experts crawling all over it. We're done. Paul finally turned to look at me. There was a faint glint in his eyes, something that wasn't there in the meeting. It wasn't panic. It was amusement. Chloe, he said, his voice low and even. What is the first rule of magic? I stared at him, bewildered. Magic? What are you talking about? This isn't a magic trick. This is a multi-million-dollar disaster. The first rule of magic, he repeated, ignoring my outburst, is misdirection. You make the audience look at your right hand while your left hand is doing the real work. The elevator doors opened to the main lobby. A security guard in a crisp uniform nodded at us as we walked past. My heart was hammering against my ribs. I felt like a fraud, like everyone could see right through me. Carter thinks the software is my right hand, Paul continued as we stepped out into the bustling New York street. The sudden noise of traffic was a shock after the tomb-like silence of the building. He's so proud of himself. He demanded to see it, to pick it apart, to prove how smart he is. He's going to put all of his resources, all of his best people, into staring at my right hand. He hailed a cab, and one swerved to the curb immediately. We slid into the back seat. He gave the driver an address in a quiet, industrial part of Brooklyn. I don't understand, I said, my frustration growing. What's the left hand? Paul leaned back against the worn leather seat and smiled, a true, genuine smile. The hardware, Chloe. The left hand is the hardware. I just looked at him, waiting. I'm going to give Carter's team the most beautiful, elegant, and perfectly secure source code they have ever seen, he explained. It will be a masterpiece. They will audit it for weeks and find nothing, not a single flaw, not a single vulnerability. They'll sign off on it, call me a genius, and Carter will feel like the king of the world for being so thorough. But if the code is clean, how do we get in? I asked, a tiny flicker of hope starting to burn through the fog of my panic. Because the Trojan horse was never going to be in the software, he said. That was just the bait. The real backdoor is burned directly into the firmware of the network cards. It's in the BIOS of the custom servers I'm building for them. It's a ghost in the machine, Chloe. It's part of the building's bones. No software audit in the world will ever find it. They'd have to physically dismantle every server and run an electron microscope over every microchip to even have a chance. The full weight of his plan hit me. It was audacious. It was terrifying. It was brilliant. Carter's paranoia, his need to control every variable, was the very thing Paul was exploiting. He had demanded a software audit, focusing all his attention on the digital world, never considering that the threat could be physical, embedded in the very steel and silicon he was paying millions for. His own team will inspect the hardware, I remembered, the dread returning slightly. Of course they will, Paul said with a shrug. They'll check the serial numbers. They'll make sure the components match the invoice. They'll plug it in and see that it works perfectly. They're IT guys, not electrical engineers who specialize in hardware forensics. They're looking for a bomb, but I've built a virus into the DNA of the building itself. He had turned Carter's greatest strength, his meticulous security obsession, into his greatest weakness. Carter thought he was building a fortress, but Paul was designing the bricks. My father's words came back to me then, clear as a bell. Every foundation has cracks. You just have to know where to press. Paul wasn't just pressing on a crack. He was building the crack into the foundation from the start. I leaned my head back against the seat, the city blurring past the window. The fear that had been choking me for the last hour was gone, replaced by a surge of adrenaline. The path hadn't gotten narrower. It had changed completely. Paul had laid down a new path, hidden in plain sight. It was a high-wire act without a net, but for the first time, I felt like we were the ones in control of the show. Carter was just the audience, looking exactly where we wanted him to. The taxi dropped us off in front of a nondescript warehouse in Red Hook, the kind with corrugated metal walls and windows too high up to see through. This was Paul's domain. Inside, it wasn't a dusty storage space, but a clean, climate-controlled laboratory filled with soldering stations, oscilloscopes, and racks of electronic components. It smelled of ozone and hot metal. For the next 3 weeks, this became my world. My role wasn't technical. Paul was the artist, the surgeon meticulously crafting his masterpiece of deception. I was the producer. I handled the logistics, the finances, and the cover story. Using a shell corporation I'd set up years ago for my own business investments, I sourced the components Paul needed from dozens of different suppliers across the globe. Each piece was ordered separately, shipped to different P.O. boxes, and then collected by me in a rented van. It was tedious, paranoid work, but necessary. We couldn't have a single paper trail leading back to Paul or me. One afternoon, while Paul was carefully modifying the BIOS on a motherboard, my phone buzzed. It was a number I didn't recognize, but the area code was Manhattan. My stomach tightened. "Hello?" I answered, trying to keep my voice steady. "Chloe, it's Carter." The voice was smooth, confident, and dripping with condescension. "Your father gave me your number. He said you were dabbling in the tech world now. Cute." I clenched my jaw. "I'm running a business, Carter. What do you want?" "Just calling to check in. We're about to launch a major new platform, state-of-the-art security. We hired the best guy in the business to build our infrastructure from the ground up. A real genius. It's a fortress, Chloe. Impenetrable. Something you might learn from if you ever decide to play with the big boys." My eyes met Paul's from across the workshop. He had paused his work, listening, a faint knowing smile on his face. The irony was so thick I could barely breathe. Carter was bragging to me about the very trap we were setting for him. "I'm sure it is," I said, my voice flat. "Good luck with that." "We don't need luck," he chuckled. "We have diligence. My team is auditing every line of the source code as we speak, not a single vulnerability. Perfect. That's the difference between a professional operation and a child's hobby." He hung up. I put the phone down, my hand shaking slightly, not from fear, but from a strange, cold fury. He was so arrogant, so certain of his own superiority. He was staring so hard at the front door that he'd never imagined someone was already inside, patiently waiting in the walls. The close call came a week later. A delivery of custom-fabricated casings for the servers was delayed in customs. The delivery date for the finished hardware was non-negotiable. Carter's entire launch schedule was built around it. For 48 hours, we were in limbo. I spent hours on the phone with shipping agents and customs brokers, using every bit of charm and pressure I could muster. Paul, for the first time, looked stressed. Without those casings, the servers would look amateurish, raising suspicion. Finally, the package was released. I drove the van to the airport logistics center myself at 3 a.m. to pick it up. As I loaded the last box, I saw a black town car parked a few rows away. It was the kind my father used. For a heart-stopping moment, I thought I was caught. But the car just sat there, its windows tinted and unreadable. I forced myself to act casual, got in the van, and drove away, my heart hammering against my ribs until I was miles away. It was probably nothing, just a random car, but it was a reminder of how high the stakes were. On the final day, the servers stood in a perfect, gleaming row in the center of the workshop. They looked like sculptures of black steel and blue LED lights. They were beautiful, powerful, and utterly sterile. To any IT professional, they would look like the pinnacle of security. A fortress, just as Carter had described. But I knew the truth. They were hollow. They were a ghost ship, waiting for its signal. Paul walked me through the interface one last time. It was a simple, encrypted communication app he had designed for my phone. "When the time is right," he said, his voice low and serious, "you just type this one command phrase and hit send. That's it. The command will route through a dozen countries in a second, then hit the hardware. It will activate a root process that lives outside the operating system. They won't be able to detect it, and they won't be able to shut it down. From that moment on, we own them. Every file, every email, every transaction." He handed me a small piece of paper with the command phrase written on it. I memorized it, And then, as he instructed, I burned it in a metal dish until it was nothing but gray ash. The next morning, the official transport company, hired by Carter, arrived. Their workers, dressed in uniforms, carefully loaded each server onto the truck. Paul and I stood back and watched, posing as the third-party contractors who had assembled the units. As the truck's rear door rolled down, sealing our Trojan horses inside, I thought of my father. I thought of him in his leather chair, talking about investments and respectable futures. He taught me that every foundation has cracks, you just have to know where to press. But Paul and I had learned a better lesson. Why look for a crack when you can build one yourself, right into the heart of the stone, and watch them build their entire empire on top of it, never knowing the ground beneath their feet was designed to crumble at your command? The truck pulled away from the curb, and I knew the final act was about to begin. The launch was a global online event. I watched it from Paul's workshop on a massive monitor, a bottle of cheap sparkling wine between us. Carter stood on a stage, bathed in blue light, looking like a tech messiah. He used words like paradigm shift, unbreachable, and next-generation synergy. He was selling a fortress. My father, Richard, and my mother, Cynthia, were in the front row, their faces glowing with pride. They were applauding a ghost ship. "Perfect," Carter said, his voice echoing through the auditorium. "That's the difference between a professional operation and a child's hobby." He was quoting himself from our last phone call. The arrogance was breathtaking. "Now?" Paul asked, his eyes fixed on the screen. "Now," I said. I opened the app on my phone. It was a black screen with a single blinking cursor. My hands were steady. I typed the command phrase, the one I had burned to ash but seared into my memory. I hit send. For a second, nothing happened. The live stream continued. Carter was smiling, accepting applause. Then behind him, the giant screen displaying the company's logo flickered. It went black. A single line of text appeared in simple green font. "A fortress is only as strong as its foundation, and yours was built on sand." Chaos erupted. The live stream cut out, but my work was just beginning. For the next hour, Paul and I executed the second phase. We didn't steal money. We stole truth. We downloaded every file. The internal audits showing they'd cut corners on safety protocols. The emails detailing a plan to sell user data. The offshore account information for my father's consulting fees. Then we released it all. We didn't send it to one news outlet. We sent it to hundreds simultaneously through an anonymous portal Paul had built. By morning, Carter's company was in freefall. The stock had lost 90% of its value before trading was halted. I had taken my entire life savings and shorted the stock the day before. It was the biggest gamble of my life. It paid off. I wasn't just solvent. I was wealthy. 2 days later, the news was full of it. Carter had been fired. Richard was under investigation by the SEC. Their perfect professional operation had been dismantled by a child's hobby. That afternoon, I met with a team of lawyers. They were mine, paid for with the money I had earned from my parents' downfall. The transaction was simple. The corporation that owned my parents' luxury apartment complex was a subsidiary of Carter's parent company. With the stock now worthless, the parent company was desperately liquidating assets to cover its losses. I made them an offer in cash. They accepted without hesitation. The next morning, I drove my sensible, paid-for van to the building. I didn't park in the visitor's lot. I parked in the spot reserved for the owner. I walked past the doorman who looked at me with confusion and took the private elevator to the penthouse. They were in the living room, the sterile white gallery. Richard was staring out the window, a glass of scotch in his hand. Cynthia was on the sofa, her face pale and drawn. They looked older, smaller. "What are you doing here, Chloe?" Richard asked, not turning around. His voice was brittle. "Have you come to gloat?" "I've come to introduce myself," I said calmly. I placed a folder on the marble coffee table. "I'm the new owner of this building. Your lease is up for renewal next month. We'll need to discuss the new terms." He finally turned, his eyes wide with disbelief. He looked at the documents, then at me. This is impossible." "You taught me that every foundation has cracks, Richard," I said, my voice even. You just have to know where to press. But I learned a better lesson. Why look for a crack when you can build one yourself, right into the heart of the stone? His face crumpled. All the corporate jargon, all the talk of investments and respectable futures, it all fell away. He was just a man who had lost. Cynthia started to cry, a quiet, defeated sound. You'll be out by the end of the month, I said, turning to leave. I'm raising the rent, significantly. I'm sure you understand. It's just business. Walking out of that apartment, I didn't feel rage or even triumph. I felt quiet. I felt free. I had spent 7 years building a business from nothing, fueled by their rejection. They had wanted me to have a respectable future, and now I did. It was a future I had built myself, on my own terms, on the ruins of the hollow fortress they called a family. My foundation wasn't built on their money or their approval. It was built on my own resilience, and it was solid as rock. From a sterile living room to owning their building, they wanted me to have a respectable future. I built my own on their ruins. What did you think of my revenge? Subscribe for more stories of resilience.